I never meant for it to go this far. At first, it was just an innocent flirtation, something harmless, something to fill the emptiness I felt inside. My marriage with William had become routine, predictable, and honestly, a little suffocating. We weren't unhappy, but there was no excitement, no spark. We fell into a pattern of waking up, going through the motions of the day, coming home, eating dinner, and falling asleep next to each other without much conversation. At some point, I realized I wasn't even sure when the last time I felt truly connected to him was. I loved William, don't get me wrong. He was kind, dependable, and up until that point, everything I'd ever wanted in a partner. But somewhere along the way, I stopped feeling desired. I stopped feeling seen. We both got comfortable, maybe too comfortable. We didn't fight much, but we didn't talk much either. There was this invisible wall that kept growing between us, and I felt like I couldn't bring it up. What would I even say? Hey, I don't feel like you want me anymore. I wasn't sure if he'd even notice, let alone care. Then came Max, our dog. We adopted him one rainy weekend when William thought it would be a good idea to bring home a puppy to shake things up a bit. At first, I didn't think much of it. He was just a cute dog, a little ball of fur who would run around the living room and tug at my heartstrings. But over time, something changed. I began to spend more time with him, playing with him, talking to him when I felt lonely or neglected. I would sit on the couch stroking his fur, feeling his little body curled up against mine, and it was the only time I felt like I wasn't just going through the motions. Max was there for me in a way that William wasn't. I didn't even realize how much I was leaning on Max for emotional support until it became too late. I would talk to him about everything, about how I felt disconnected from William, how we hardly touched anymore, how the sparks seemed to have died. Max would just look up at me with those big brown eyes, and it felt like he was listening. I had no one else to talk to, not because I didn't have friends, but because I didn't want to admit to anyone how distant my marriage had become. I didn't want to be judged. As the days went by, I started spending more and more time with Max. I'd leave work early to take him for walks or cuddle with him on the couch. Every moment I was with him, I felt some of the pain I'd been carrying melt away. It was like a drug, and I couldn't get enough of it. And slowly, in a way I couldn't fully explain, I started to rely on him in a way that was wrong. It wasn't just companionship anymore. It was something deeper, something I didn't want to acknowledge, something I didn't want to admit to myself. But then the guilt started creeping in. I told myself I was just lonely, just needing someone to fill the emotional void that had been growing between William and me. But deep down, I knew I was crossing a line. I wasn't sure when it started, but at some point I wasn't just seeking affection. I was becoming attached to Max in a way that went beyond the bond of owner and pet. There were moments when I looked at him and it felt like he was more than just a dog. He was the only one who made me feel wanted, needed. When he'd jump into my lap and nuzzle me with his cold nose, I felt this rush of relief. It was like he was the only one who could fill that emptiness. I never set out to hurt William. I never intended for it to go this far. But there I was, wrapped up in a mess of emotions I didn't know how to deal with. Max had become my escape from the loneliness I felt in my marriage. And I thought no one would ever know. I told myself that it was harmless, that I was just seeking affection, something I wasn't getting from William. But deep down, I knew it wasn't innocent anymore. I knew I had let it go too far, and I didn't know how to stop it. I was in too deep, and the more time I spent with Max, the harder it became to remember why I had let this happen in the first place. I should have talked to William. I should have confessed how I was feeling, but I didn't. Instead, I let it fester inside of me. I pushed it down because I didn't want to face the truth. I was ashamed, even though I hadn't done anything wrong in the traditional sense. But I knew deep down I was betraying something precious. I was betraying my marriage. I was betraying William. And I didn't know how to stop. That's how it all began, the quiet, creeping feeling of betrayal. It was subtle at first, but it soon consumed me. And I didn't know how to get out of it before it destroyed everything. As time went on, the guilt I felt began to consume me. It wasn't just a passing thought or something that I could push to the back of my mind. It was a constant weight pressing down on my chest, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't escape it. Every moment I spent with Max made me feel more disconnected from William, and yet I couldn't stop. The more I leaned on Max for comfort, the more I resented the fact that I needed him to fill a void that should have been filled by my husband. It was twisted, but it felt like the only way I could cope. I told myself it was harmless, that it was just a bit of attention that I was missing. Everyone craved attention, right? But deep down, I knew it wasn't just about attention anymore. It was something deeper, something darker. The affection Max gave me made me feel wanted in a way that I wasn't getting from William. I started to feel like I couldn't be honest with William anymore. How could I possibly explain the mess I was in? How could I tell him that I'd let things get this far without him even noticing? It would be too humiliating, and I didn't think I could bear seeing the disappointment in his eyes if he ever found out. I couldn't even look at William the same way anymore. Every time I saw him, a pit would form in my stomach. I'd feel this sharp, almost physical ache in my chest, knowing I had betrayed him in ways I couldn't even begin to explain. But I couldn't stop. I couldn't stop running to Max when the silence between me and William grew too loud, when the loneliness became too much to bear. I needed Max more than I needed anything else. But the guilt was always there, lurking in the background, a reminder of the wrongness of it all. There were moments when I tried to make things better with William. I'd make dinner, try to be affectionate, try to spark some kind of connection, but it always felt forced. It felt like we were both playing roles, pretending that everything was okay when, deep down, neither of us was truly happy. I'd sit across from him at the dinner table, and as he spoke about his day, I couldn't help but think about Max, about how he was the one who truly understood me, the one who didn't need me to be anything I wasn't. Max never judged me. He never made me feel like I was failing or falling short. He simply gave me the affection I needed, the kind that I wasn't getting from William. And yet, every time I would look at William, I'd feel the guilt weigh me down even more. He was the one I had chosen, the one I had promised to love and cherish. I could see the hurt in his eyes, even though he never said anything. I could see the way he looked at me, the way he pulled away when I tried to get close. I knew he could sense that something was off, that something wasn't right between us, but he didn't know what it was. He didn't know that the one thing I had been clinging to was the dog we had brought into our lives as a simple companion. The worst part was that I wasn't even sure why I kept doing it. I wasn't getting anything out of it, at least not in a way that I could be proud of. It was like I was trapped in this cycle of needing more and more of Max's attention while slowly losing the one thing that truly mattered: my relationship with William. I tried to justify it to myself. I told myself that I was just lonely, that I wasn't getting the emotional connection I needed, but I knew it was more than that. It was an escape. It was a way to avoid facing the reality of what had become of my marriage, of what I had allowed to happen. The guilt was a constant companion now. I felt it when I woke up in the morning, when I lay next to William at night, pretending to sleep while my mind raced with thoughts of Max. It was eating me alive, and yet I couldn't stop. I felt like I was drowning in shame, but there was no way out. I didn't want to admit what was happening. I didn't want to face the consequences of what I had done. I didn't want to lose everything, but I knew that's exactly where it was headed. I just didn't know how to stop. I couldn't even bring myself to talk to anyone about it. Not my friends, not my family, no one. I was ashamed, too ashamed to admit to anyone, even myself, what had been going on. How could I explain the mess I had gotten myself into? How could I possibly ask for help when I knew I was the one who had crossed the line? How could I admit that I had chosen something, someone, other than the person I had promised to love? I couldn't. I just kept it all bottled up inside, trying to pretend that everything was fine when inside, I was falling apart. It happened on a regular Tuesday, or at least it started out that way. William had stayed late at work, which was nothing unusual. He often had long hours, and it gave me more time alone with Max. I didn't think much of it. I went through the motions of my evening feeding Max, taking him for a walk, and then settling into the couch with my book. It had become routine, the way I spent my evenings. The loneliness was familiar. almost comforting in a twisted sort of way. But that night, something felt different. There was a tension in the air that I couldn't shake. Max was restless. He kept pacing around the living room, his eyes fixed on me, his tail wagging furiously. I thought he just wanted attention, which was normal. But that night, it wasn't just about petting or playing. There was a longing in his eyes that made me pause. Maybe it was the way I'd been ignoring the growing attraction I had for him, or maybe it was just the loneliness that had taken root deep inside me. But whatever it was, I couldn't push it away. I remember sitting there on the couch, Max lying next to me, his head on my lap as I absent-mindedly stroked his fur. There was something about the way he was looking at me that night, something intense, almost as though he could see right through me. I had never seen him quite like that before. It made me feel vulnerable, exposed. It was as if he knew everything I had been hiding, everything I had been avoiding. The loneliness, the guilt, the desperate need for something, anything that could fill the void I felt inside. The moments passed, and the distance between William and me felt like it was widening, becoming more insurmountable with each passing day. I hadn't felt close to him in a long time, and tonight, it was harder than ever to ignore. He hadn't even texted to let me know he was going to be late. He wasn't even trying anymore, not that I could blame him. I was too lost in my own web of deceit to reach out to him, too caught up in my own needs to consider what his were. And in that moment, with Max curled up beside me, I felt like I was drowning in a sea of regret. When I heard the front door creak open, I froze. My heart skipped a beat. It wasn't the sound of a person arriving, it was the sound of the truth rushing in. William was home early. My panic hit me like a wave. For a second, I thought about rushing to get up, to hide everything, to pretend like everything was normal. But I couldn't. I didn't move. I didn't know what to do. All I could hear was the sound of my heartbeat pounding in my ears. William's voice echoed through the hallway as he called out my name. He sounded distant, distracted, as though he was in a hurry or caught off guard. I couldn't respond. I couldn't make a sound. My body felt frozen, as if I was paralyzed by the situation I had found myself in. What could I say? What could I possibly say that would explain this? There was nothing to explain. There was no excuse for what I had done. I knew that, but the shame that washed over me in that moment was overwhelming. I could hear him coming closer, his footsteps growing louder with each passing second, and still I didn't move. I just sat there, my hands trembling as they hovered over Max's fur. Max looked up at me with those innocent eyes, oblivious to the chaos that was about to unfold. I wanted to push him away, to stand up and act like nothing was wrong, but I couldn't. It was as if my entire body had been paralyzed by the realization of what I had done, what I had allowed to happen. The door to the living room opened. William stood there, his expression unreadable at first, but it didn't take long for the confusion to turn to something else, something I couldn't ignore. It was hurt. Pure hurt. His eyes scanned the room quickly, falling on Max and then on me. I saw the way his shoulders tensed, the way his lips tightened, as if he were trying to process what he was seeing but couldn't make sense of it. I had no words. I could feel the lump in my throat, but it was as if every part of me had been swallowed up by the guilt. I couldn't speak, couldn't tell him how it had all spiraled out of control. I couldn't tell him how I had allowed myself to fall into this, how I had let Max become something more than a companion, how I had let the distance between us grow to the point where I found myself here, caught in the act, with no way to undo the damage. For a long moment, neither of us said a word. The silence was deafening, suffocating. William's gaze shifted between Max and me, and I could see the confusion giving way to something darker, disappointment, maybe even disgust. I couldn't blame him. I felt it too. And then, just like that, it was all out in the open. There was no more hiding, no more pretending. William had seen enough, and I had no way to undo what had already been done. The weight of the truth pressed down on me with a force I wasn't prepared for, and in that moment I realized how far I had fallen, how much I had lost. The silence that followed was unbearable. I had never felt anything like it. There was no screaming, no harsh words, just this thick, suffocating quiet between us. William stood there, frozen in place, his eyes fixed on me in a way that felt like he was seeing me for the first time. But it wasn't a look of love or understanding. It was something darker, something that cut deeper than any words could. The hurt in his eyes was palpable, and it tore me apart to see it. I had never wanted to hurt him, not like this. But now, standing there, I realized that I had shattered everything between us in a moment of weakness, in a desperate need to escape the loneliness that had been slowly swallowing me whole. Max, oblivious to the weight of the moment, looked up at William, then back at me, as if he didn't understand why the room had suddenly become so heavy. I wished I could say the same. I felt like I was suffocating, drowning in my own guilt. I had no idea what to say, what to do. It was as if the truth was too much to bear, too much for any of us to process. William's voice broke the silence, but it wasn't the voice I knew. It was quiet, strained, as though he was holding back something much darker. "What the hell is this?" he asked, his words sharp, but somehow laced with disbelief. I couldn't answer. I couldn't form a sentence. I just stood there, frozen, knowing that no matter what I said, it wouldn't undo the damage I had done. The look he gave me wasn't anger at first. It was confusion. The kind that comes when someone is trying to make sense of something that doesn't make sense at all. And then, almost imperceptibly, that confusion turned into something else. Hurt. Betrayal. It was all there, written all over his face. He didn't need to say anything else. His eyes said it all. He had trusted me. He had given me his heart, his loyalty, and I had thrown it all away. He had never imagined, not in a million years, that something like this would happen between us. And now, here I was, caught in the act, with no excuse, no way to defend myself. I could feel the walls closing in on me. I tried to speak, but my throat felt tight, like I was choking on the weight of my own guilt. "William, I didn't mean for this to happen," I stammered, but the words felt hollow. They were empty, meaningless. There was no way to justify what I had done. No way to explain how it had spiraled out of control, how I had let myself be consumed by this feeling of emptiness that had been building inside me for so long. It didn't matter anymore. Nothing mattered now. He shook his head slowly, as if he couldn't believe what he was hearing. "You didn't mean for this to happen." His voice was quieter now, almost broken. "How do you not mean for this to happen? How do you let it go this far?" The disappointment in his voice hit me harder than anything else. He wasn't angry, not at first, he was just disappointed. And that was worse. The hurt in his eyes was like a physical blow. I could feel it in my chest, a tightness that made it hard to breathe. I don't know. I don't know what happened," I said, my voice cracking. I wanted to explain, to tell him everything, but I couldn't find the words. The truth was too painful. I had let everything go, and now I was paying the price. I had betrayed him, betrayed our marriage, and there was no going back from that. I couldn't fix it. I couldn't make it right. William took a deep breath, as if trying to steady himself, and for a moment I thought he might say something, anything, to try to make sense of it. But then he just turned away. He walked across the room without looking back at me. His footsteps were slow, deliberate, as though he was trying to keep himself together, trying to hold on to whatever composure he had left, but I could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his jaw clenched. I could feel the distance between us growing, stretching further and further apart with every passing second. "I need some space," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. It wasn't a request. It was a statement, a fact that I couldn't ignore. He didn't want to be near me. He couldn't stand to be near me. I had broken something inside him that I didn't think could ever be fixed. And now I was left standing in the ruins of everything we had built. I watched him walk out of the room, his figure disappearing down the hallway. The door to the bedroom closed softly behind him, and I was left standing there, alone with the weight of my actions. I felt like I was sinking into the floor, like the weight of what I had done was too much to bear. I had lost him. I had lost everything. And the worst part was, I knew I deserved it. I had pushed him away, pushed him into a corner where he could no longer trust me, where I had no right to ask for forgiveness. But that didn't make the pain any easier to bear. It didn't make the loneliness that followed any less suffocating. I had betrayed him in the worst way possible, and now I was left with the aftermath: broken trust, shattered love, and a heart full of regret. The hours that followed were nothing like I expected. I had imagined crying, begging, pleading for his forgiveness, but none of that came. Instead, I was paralyzed in a way I'd never been before. There was no fight left in me. The house felt too quiet, too empty, and I could feel the space between William and me widening with every passing minute. It was as if all the air had been sucked out of the room, leaving only this dense, suffocating silence. I sat on the couch, my hands shaking, my mind racing, trying to process everything that had just happened, but it all felt like it was happening to someone else. I couldn't stop thinking about how I'd let it get this far, about the lies I had told myself and the lies I had told him. How had I convinced myself that this was all okay? That I was just lonely, that it was just harmless? I had betrayed him in ways I couldn't even fully understand, and now I was left with the aftermath. I wanted to talk to him, to explain, to beg him to hear me out, but I knew it was pointless. He had seen it. He had seen everything. What could I possibly say? How could I explain to him that it wasn't just a moment of weakness, that it was a pattern, something deeper than I was willing to admit to myself? The truth was too ugly to face. The night dragged on, and the emptiness in the house was unbearable. I could hear the faint sounds of movement from the bedroom, but it wasn't the sound of comfort or closeness, it was the sound of separation. It was like we were on opposite ends of a vast ocean, and no matter how hard we tried to reach each other, there was no way across. The thought of that distance between us broke something inside me. I wanted to reach out to him, but I knew I couldn't. Not now. Not after everything that had happened. Eventually, I couldn't take it any longer. I stood up from the couch, my legs unsteady beneath me, and walked down the hallway. I wasn't sure what I was hoping for. Maybe I thought I could make things right. Maybe I thought if I just talked to him, if I just explained myself, he would understand. But as I stood at the bedroom door, the reality of it hit me. I had destroyed our trust. I had destroyed everything. There was no going back from this. No words would fix it. No apology would erase the hurt. I didn't knock. I just opened the door slowly, my heart pounding in my chest. William was sitting on the edge of the bed, his face in his hands. I had never seen him like this, so defeated, so broken. I had broken him, and seeing him like this made everything worse. I wanted to go to him, to hold him, to comfort him, but I couldn't. The space between us felt insurmountable. He didn't look up when I entered the room. He didn't acknowledge my presence at all, and in that moment I realized that I had already lost him. I had already lost him in ways I couldn't undo. The thought of it hit me harder than anything else. I had taken the one person who had trusted me completely, the one person I had promised to love, and I had shattered everything. And for what? For a momentary escape from loneliness? For something that wasn't even real? I stood there motionless, watching him. I could feel the weight of everything pressing down on me, but there was nothing I could do. Nothing I could say to make it better. The realization settled over me like a cold blanket, and I wanted to scream. I wanted to scream at myself for being so foolish, so selfish. I had hurt the one person who had never hurt me, the one person who had been there for me in ways I couldn't even begin to describe. And now I had lost him. I had lost us. Finally, William looked up. His eyes were red, his face pale, but there was no anger in his gaze, no bitterness, only sadness. The sadness that comes from knowing that the person you loved and trusted has betrayed you in ways you can't ever truly forgive. "I don't know how to fix this," he said quietly. His voice was raw, like he was struggling to even speak. I didn't know how to respond. There were no words left. What could I say? I had no excuse for what I had done. I had no way to fix it. "I never wanted to hurt you," I whispered, my voice breaking. But even as I said it, I knew it wasn't enough. It could never be enough. The damage was done. He stood up from the bed slowly, taking a step toward me. But it wasn't a step toward reconciliation. It was a step toward the inevitable truth that we couldn't come back from this. "You didn't just hurt me," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "You hurt us. You destroyed everything." And with that, I knew that it was over. He was right. I had destroyed everything. There was no going back from this, no rebuilding what we once had. I had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. And in that moment, I felt the full weight of my actions, the full weight of my regret. William turned away then, his back to me, and I knew he was already starting to pull away, already starting to shut me out. And as I stood there watching him walk away, I couldn't help but feel like I was losing myself too.